Nexus. Hi, Colin.
Hello.
And I have some questions prepared, and we will just dig through them one by one. Alright, so first question. You mentioned several times that Nexus project is now in third phase of life. What do you mean by that, and can you describe each phase?
Yeah, sure. So we're terming it as Chapter 3. Chapter 1, as we know, was our initial 2014, 2015, 2016. The way I describe that is almost a brainstorming phase. As you know, we changed names a few times. We were starting to get a bearing on exactly the full scope of the project. Originally it was CoinShield, and then we went to Nexus Nero to try to, create a currency name, kind of like we'd have bot or anything else. And then we started to settle kind of on Nexus after that. So what Chapter 1 really kind of came together is developing a lot of the architecture, developing the ideas and maturing them to the point we actually had a long-term mark to be looking at. And a lot of it came from brainstorming from the community. That's, if you look at Bitcoin Talk, the first 3-4 months of the development was simply just asking people what they wanted. And that's really what developed it to what it is now. Now, Chapter 2 came along, and that's when we started to really see a lot of traction in the project, where we started seeing the growth of it, and we had the massive bull run of 2017. And then the first efforts towards at least developing a more distributed governance model. Now, that was, at the time, the Nexus Embassy, which the attempt of that was to essentially be able to create legal recognition for some of the funding mechanism, create a little bit more of the structure that we needed to try to make the team more effective. Now, as we see from Chapter 2, we learned a lot. We had an expansion cycle. We saw a lot of alienation from the community. We saw people come in that didn't necessarily represent the project's means. And that brought a lot of challenges to light, which also I think was a positive when we look at it in the long term, because as we've seen, a lot of these cryptocurrencies suffer from governance issues. We saw Bitcoin become compromised from Blockstream. We're seeing Bitcoin Cash in a civil war in itself right now. We see Cardano attacking each other for the foundation's money. And, there's not always going to be people that come in with the intentions of the project that we all are aligned at. There's not always going to be people that really believe in it. It's far beyond money. And we saw a lot of that corruption actually come in. And it was a good exercise for me to learn how to eradicate that. It was not an easy process, but now it's just furthering the necessity for distribution and distribution of the resources, because it's interesting to see how just one or two people can come in and completely tear something apart when they're put in a position of power. So that Chapter 2 being closed kind of is closing with the Nexus Embassy being closed. Some people that came in that pledged to be doing right for it have been eliminated from it, and now we've grown that much stronger and realized the necessity for distribution on a larger scale. So Chapter 3 kind of came into being with the Tritium Trust update, which, as we know, started to bring the trust keys. Now we have over 500 trust keys, which we're seeing steady growth there. It's easier to keep your interest rates. The community has kind of healed from that Chapter 2 as we see it, which is good, because now as we're in Chapter 3 with now 3 embassies as well, which are distributed, and none of them are owned, but as far as the way that they're governed and regulated, we have the Australian embassy, which is being led by Nick Henry and Paul Screen and a few of them other ones. Some of you know Paul Screen being one of the oldest community members from back in day one of the launch of CoinShield, and then Alex El Namer, who's doing the UK embassy. He's doing a lot of business development out in London. London seems to be a really hot spot, and Europe is actually quite a farther ahead than the States as far as recognition of cryptocurrency. And then the United States embassy, which is in itself another entity out in the States. Now that's been downsized significantly. Salaries are at reasonable levels now, and we're also creating distributed company structures as well for Chapter 3, which creates kind of certain protections between some of the different operations that go on. So there's the for-profit development entity, Nexus Development LLC, whatever, and then Nexus Embassy US, which is to hold the keys, and then the third part would be a charity. And so with that, the charity can be independently operated as well. It should be independently operated, all of these to check and balance one another, so that the for-profit development company interacts with the nonprofit, in order to bill it for certain things that are done. And so that creates even more distribution internally of how each embassy operates. And so I see chapter 2 is, it was in a way a really good opportunity to learn all these necessary lessons before we got too big. If we had to go through all this stuff when we were multi-billion-dollar cryptocurrency, I think it would have been very devastating. And with the growth that we have and the beautiful vision that we're trying to share with the world, we're going to see more and more of these people try to come after it and try to turn it into another corporate whatever scheme. So now as a team and as a community, we're well aware of the way these things work and how they can happen, and we can prevent it from happening again. So combining that's where we're seeing chapter 3 is it's going to be a massive building of the foundation work is done now. I mean, the architecture of Tritium is complete. The architecture of the multidimensional chain is complete. Now it's building it out. And the architecture on the social side is definitely developed a lot more than it was. I wouldn't say it's complete. That's going to be an ongoing process consistently. We're working on social scalability with a social stack, different groups that work together and self-manage and self-regulate, because that's something that we definitely need to see is how do we create structures for people to organize themselves where they self-organize and they don't need any central leadership. We've seen that the lack of central leadership in Bitcoin created central leadership, and it's kind of ironic that that's how dictatorships take form. When there's chaos, a dictator comes in and they throw a coup to create order. And so what we really need to do as a community in chapter 3 is figure out how we can be self-reliant, self-maintaining, self-organizing, so that we don't have any of this chaos and that we all check and balance one another, just as the embassies check and balance one another and the community members check and balance one another, and really getting this technology out of this foundational phase into a further development and more use in the real world. And that's kind of the prime of chapter 3. And we see chapter 4, speculative. We can get to that at later times, but I think chapter 3 is going to be another very beautiful growth as far as I see it. And I think we have all the right pieces in place now that it's time to get all put together.
Okay, all right. So after all that time, what are your biggest wins and losses on Nexus so far? What are you most proud of, and what do you regret?
Well, generally like to live life without regrets. I could say that I regret certain things that happened in chapter 2. I could say I regret letting people tell me how the project needed to be run, even though I knew in my heart what I needed to do. But ultimately that all brought us to where we are. So regret, none. I think everything that we have come to now has been necessary to get us to where we are now, and we're much stronger for that. As far as the wins, I mean, when I first started Tritium back last year, I think it was March, I said, hey, it's right around the corner, because I'd just gotten the LLP packet functioning, and that was something that we were going to help scale the network with, and some of the L1 locking channels and things like that. And what it's really grown into with the stack and all the people that we've really got developing this, we have some beautiful minds that are helping, including Dino Farinacci and a few other ones that really we've attracted such an incredible talent because we're working on something so unique. And I feel like it's a great win to be able to go out and be talking to some of these people about blockchain, like in London or in the US, and seeing how little people know and how much so many people say they know. And it's really just been a pleasure to be able to share that knowledge and to see the reflection of that we really have something. We have something really beautiful here, and we have something that I don't think a lot of people have really considered. I think that's one of the biggest wins is the technology incubation tank that we have. And I think it really has a lot of potential, especially as we see it become more and more of a reality.
Okay, let's move to another question now. Elon Musk recently fired at least 7 executives as he was not happy with Starlink progress. He now pushed very aggressively for starting building Starlink network in half of 2019. How can Vector and Nexus compete with that? And is it a direct competition after all?
It's not a direct competition because he's building on the old archaic model. He's building an ISP, internet service provider. We're working on something completely different, which is an economic system in space that people can proliferate on. and develop models for themselves. So that's something that you really can't buy or compete with, because we have just such a new way to think. And when you're thinking the old way, you're going to just end up creating the same thing. We already have ISPs in space. You know, people are going to pay for internet, yeah, but when you start to create an internet that is censorship free, that is built by people, where essentially all these satellites can communicate with one another, and you can deploy it and join this constellation, and you can build your own services on it that are independently operated, I think that's something people really want. And I think it's something people really need when we're seeing such massive amounts of censorship going on in the world now, and such control over these things. So as far as needing to compete, I don't really see that, because he's going this direction and we're going this direction. So I think there's plenty of space.
So are you saying that he is basically building expensive hardware layer for already existing models, while Nexus is completely different on a network layer?
Yeah, our network is going to be completely different. Our hardware is going to be different. But the biggest thing is, I guess you can say, the architecture, the concepts that go into it. Nobody before has built a shared satellite mesh. Even our satellite engineer, Philip Swayze, who was an Iridium engineer, he's still trying to wrap his head around how do we make this decentralized, because you have satellites that have telemetry systems and they have to know where each other is. And being able to pull this model off, it's similar to kind of the blockchain philosophies, and how that works is Bitcoin provides so many economic incentives to build business on, and that's the idea, is that building this routing layer, people can deploy their satellites and produce their own independent services that may not just be for the connectivity, because the connectivity comes from the actual natural routing that comes from having this hardware up there. So I think businesses building their own, how should I say it, profitable models around this, and some of the satellites that we do, which will just be public domain to help route, will essentially proliferate. It's self-organizing. You don't need a central resource repository. You create, I guess, a new economic system around it that people build themselves, and when they can earn money doing that by producing independent services, it outperforms any centralized model.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting aspect of Nexus in general. And with the next question, we will go back to Earth. On a Nexus conference, there was an announced partnership with SoundVault. Can you share some info about progress with this particular partner?
Yeah, so when I was just in London, I think it would be a couple of weeks ago, we were discussing the actual technical movements forward. So what they're working on is essentially fixing the music industry's back end. A lot of the music industry is running on archaic technology. They don't have ways to track. SoundVault actually has some really unique technology as far as even neural networks that analyze videos that are posted to say, well, if you're an artist and somebody wants to pay for a license for your specific song and you want to make sure that there's no explicit content in that video, it will actually search for those and detect those things. So what we're helping with them in the first is to start to, I guess, develop a transactional system for their cue sheets, which the cue sheets are going to be kind of a list of different cues. People sign up for the SoundVault service and they could submit their songs in there into the repository for their copyrights and be paid directly from the other side. So it makes it extremely accessible, because music right now, there could be hundreds of publishers and then publishers of publishers of publishers. So paying the copyright is extremely difficult to do. And because of this, we see illegal downloading in music. 90 to 95% of all of the music downloads are done illegally. And a large part of that is because people feel that the artist isn't being treated fairly. And it's incredibly difficult to find out even who to pay. So this is going to remove an incredible amount of friction in that process. And it's setting the stage for us with SoundVault to be starting to plug in blockchain technology into the back end of the music industry. So far, it looks like they're making a lot of progress on building actually a client base for this. So we're slowly integrating, starting with their cue sheets and then developing more into a token model, which, as you saw in my Tritium demo, it allows split revenues or split joint payments based on token ownership. So there's going to be other features that we can start building in for them. So coming on the Tritium update, that's when we're going to be deploying a lot more, and they're looking to be moving very quickly. So that's going to be something that's going to really help validate our technology and make it something used in a real way that is really affecting people and industries.
Yes, there is a lot of people in the Nexus community that are excited about this project. And can you talk about partnership with other projects, at least give idea how many of them might come to use in 2019?
Well, so Space Chain right now, that's a good one because they're the only other people in the space that have actually been doing the satellite type of, I guess, orbital nodes. Now they're doing a slightly different model. They're doing actual Qtum and Nexus going to be running on their nodes, and we're doing kind of routing. So we're going to be helping mesh that. So we've already started discussing some things with their satellite designers and our satellite designer in order to kind of integrate that technology. So I'm seeing hopefully more of that coming in 2019, especially our first Cube satellite will be up. Their first Cube satellite, they have 2 up now, I believe. They just successfully launched their second one. And then I think we're going to also be seeing a lot more of the work we've been doing over the last year or so coming to light as far as building this validity, building these use cases, because technology is one thing. You can have this in one hand, and you could have the best technology in the world, but if nobody uses it, it doesn't mean anything. So that's why the technological development is just as important as the business development and creating the validity of it and helping people learn to integrate with it. And that's how you've seen the Tritium stack. It was formed just for market research, where we talked to people over and over, business to business, blockchain people, non-blockchain people, music industry reps, anybody else, and we'd start to kind of formulate and find the simple common denominator that makes it really necessary. What is the blockchain really going to be good for? And from that, now we've developed this architecture, which when we go and we talk to business, we see a lot of positive receptivity from it. So we're going to be seeing some more coming to the surface than we've been able to announce thus far. And we definitely hope you guys enjoy it. It's definitely been an exciting journey.
Sure. And you think some of this will be live in 2019 or only announced?
Based on the way we're seeing things, we should be seeing a lot of actual use, not just announcements. We don't like to just partner to partner. We like, we like to actually do something with it. So there's going to be some announcements, but some of the things that we're working on, we're definitely going to be seeing a lot of practical real-world use. That's the way to get other people to start to integrate. So that's definitely the plan, and that's part of the reason for our timeline as well, because we have a lot of other people besides just the Nexus community that I think are waiting for this upgrade, and we need to make it something viable for people to be able to integrate with.
Nice. There is never enough real-world use case in crypto. So another topic. One of the very exciting features in Nexus is LISP integration. Do you think LISP has chance to evolve into worldwide standard for networking?
Yes, it definitely has that potential, especially LISP kind of filled a missing piece for us, as we've actually filled this missing piece for LISP. LISP is already used pretty substantially by Cisco, from what I understand. There's a lot of web services that are starting to use it, but LISP as it exists now, or existed before us, was a centralized model where you'd issue the IP addresses, you'd create your own instance ID, your own private network. Now, we're working on this decentralized model, which is LISP Decent, if you've seen Dino talking about it. Now, what's really important about this is we create the ability for your endpoint identifier, right? Let's call this your static IP address now, to be tied to the actual ledger. And what's important about that is you're not going to be able to spoof IP addresses anymore. You can go around and pretend to be a million different people, and we've seen people do that in Slack. With this, you're not going to have your, how should I say it, location revealed. You'll have the privacy that you get, but you'll still have the same, I guess, routing location or endpoint identification, which you tie that to a trust key or a signature chain. And what happens is you have the reputation built up from the signature chain, and you tie that to the routing identity so that when somebody else, let's say, goes to a normal service, they're going to have the EID essentially located, and they're going to know who they're talking to, so it's going to be very difficult for somebody to pretend to be somebody else. You don't have to know this someone is this someone from the public perspective. You know it contextually, which means this random series of alphanumeric letters and numbers essentially correlates to something in your system that you know is somebody. So we're going to see a lot of reduced fraud, and we're also going to be able to see a safer internet, because right now we rely on centralized services for the internet to actually function. We need certificate authorities, we need domain name systems, we need other authorities to issue IP addresses. In this case, it's going to be entropy and cryptography that end up being the authorities, which makes it something that's deterministic and open to anybody and more transparent, so that you can know if somebody logs into another account. You will never have to have one of those emails to say you've logged in from a different device, because with your SIG chain, username, password, and PIN, you're going to log in, and that's going to actually generate a key along with your Genesis key that you use as your crypto EID directly with LISP. So you're going to own that IP address that you generate yourself. So you can go from one computer to another computer to even a friend's computer, and you log in into Nexus, and it's going to be there. You're going to have everything you need. You're going to have your instance, you're going to have your EID, whatever. So that even logging in from a public network or a public computer, you're still you, because you've actually initiated that login. And you don't have to sacrifice any of the privacy concerns or the security, because the privacy, you can still use VPNs, you can still route your IP address, because that's the underlay, it doesn't matter. But we create this secure overlay that only people that have contributed time can have access to, so you're going to have a higher quality of people there. And of course we get the multicast scaling, which helps as well. So I mean, these two married together create a really beautiful reciprocation, and that's something that's so exciting for both Dino and myself, is we see so many possibilities of tying these together, especially in our ability to start sharding the network, which is going to be another really fun project. I'll explain what that's probably going to be more into the Amin level of thing, where we're going to work on a different IP protocol. Instead of it being IP version 6 like we're going to use with crypto IDs, we're going to actually be doing an IP version 12 where the IP address can be the block hash. So essentially you open up a connection to any index in the distributed database, and it routes through, and you grab it and it comes back, which is going to be really fun, because nobody's really been able to do anything like that. It's going to take the idea of IPFS to a level higher, because right now anything like that is abstracted above, but this we get to do all of that down on layer 3 of the network. So there's a lot of really fun possibilities, and I think it's going to be helping both of us and seeing more adoption and a safer internet.
Right. And this is a very deep technical issue, and I think if somebody watches this video and want to know more, I recommend maybe the best is just to join Slack and listen to webinar of Dino.
Yeah, and he has a lot of Zoom presentations he's been making, explaining LISP, explaining the necessities of it. You can understand the Tritium architecture as well as the LISP architecture and see how these two things tie together. But essentially, yeah, it's when you really start to wrap your head around it. It took me a while, because Dino he's an amazing engineer. He's been developing on the internet since ARPANET and MILNET. So it takes a while to really figure out, but once you really start to understand it, it really has a profound effect on the way we're going to communicate in the future, especially with the NAT traversal, which is really important logic to have, especially in peer-to-peer. A lot of people suffer with this. This is why we have a bit of a decentralized topology with the seed nodes, because right now, if I'm going to make a connection to you, there has to be an open port, and if you're behind a NAT, it acts almost like a firewall. So you can't actually directly peer-to-peer connect to another client. You have to go through a server. Even when you use Signal, it's peer-to-peer, but you still have to pass through the Signal server to route. In this way, we open up the NATs, because it does NAT traversal with RTRs, which is going to help us have that more mesh-style distributed topology that's really necessary. Right now, I mean, only about 10% of Bitcoin nodes are discoverable, and that's the reason why.
And I also think that right now Nexus is probably the only one coin that is digging into networking stuff on each layer like this.
As far as I understand, yeah. I mean, a lot of cryptocurrencies say the network as the peer-to-peer network. And that's something, when Dino first came, he's asking me all these technical questions about the network, which is actually layer 3. And a lot of people don't really realize that everything that cryptocurrency is built on the OSI stack, was developed by these network engineers, as far as the cryptocurrency or the cryptography standards, with RFCs to TCP/IP to everything else. And it's really important to look at all aspects of the stack and see exactly what we can do where, because there's a lot we can do on these lower layers that we may not understand.
Okay, let's go back to Nexus conference now. There was announced that Nexus will be DEX, which means Decentralized Exchange. What is the current status of this?
So it's pretty much already there. It just requires a simple validation script. So the way it works, since we have the Tritium stack, is you have network, and then we have ledger, and then we have register, and then operation, and then API. We'll just deal with the lower 5 for right now. So your account is a register. Now this holds a state of an identifier, which represents the token and the total balance. So what you do when you are sending coins to somebody else is you're issuing a debit, which is an operation. which then reduces your value by a certain amount, and you have a validation script that says this debit's valid for the next 2 hours, otherwise it comes back to me. This is where we get the inability to lose your crypto, is having debits and credits, where you have to have another transaction that clears from the receiver in order to actually have that money move. So the debit is almost like the commitment or the pending transaction, the authorization, and the credit is the actual movement of the funds. So all you do for a decentralized exchange is you have a debit, and then on the debit you have a validation script that instead says, I require, let's say, 50 of this token to have this debit claimable. Now the token is just another identifier. And then what happens is, if somebody sends a transaction correlating to that, they're going to validate the script true with the debit of their token. It's going to check the identifier is the same, and then the balance is the same, satisfies that. Then you have that lock. You have a debit here and a debit here. Now what happens is we credit from each other. So then I can credit their token as a temporal proof, and they can credit my token as a temporal proof. So all in all, it would take 4 operations in order to have one exchange happen, and that'll happen extremely quickly. It's really only a couple database reads and writes to have that happen. So as far as the interface of, I can go log into this giant DEX, that's going to be something that's going to take a little bit more time. But as far as the functionality on the register and operations layer, that's very, very simple to achieve. And that also includes exchanging digital items. As you know, you have a register that can represent metadata as well. You can put up, if you read the SigChain's article, you'll see that there's an op transfer, or that requires a debit of a certain amount of Nexus. And then when that debit comes in, then you have that lock, and then the other person can claim that register, and then I claim their debit with a credit, and that's how you sell property. That's how you transfer property in a decentralized way with no intermediary needed, no escrow needed. It's just a simple combination of some validation scripts on the operation layer and a couple opcodes and a couple registers.
And do you have any idea when people will be able to use this function?
The plan is to have that functioning fully in Tritium. So in 2019, that's, I think, something very necessary with the token economy we're working to develop. As you saw in my presentation, we want tokens to have use, represent partial ownership, be used as proofs, to transfer assets, to be able to exchange with one another. So that's definitely part of the plan. As far as a whole web interface, you know, like we imagine probably decentralized exchanges, like logging into Coinbase, that might take a little longer. It depends on the web developers. But as far as the back end infrastructure, you'll be able to put up an order, and then you'll be able to just scan the chain for other orders, specific indexes, and then if you want to satisfy one of the orders, you just send a transfer out as a debit, and then it'll automatically happen.
Okay, now let's move to last few questions from me. And if you look at the funding of Nexus project, how long you can sustain the development if there is no new bull run anytime soon?
Well, right now we're fairly sustainable, even at 50-cent price. It really just depends on what people we really would feel necessary on the team. If we take any more hits, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to sustain the development. I'm already haven't been paid for quite a while. We have a lot of other people that we've removed, so we're fairly sustainable. But in a case that, let's say, we continue a bear market and there's more and more troubles, the 3 embassies, as we have it, will still share resources with one another. The developer keys haven't been allocated either, so we'll probably have a discussion on that, maybe 733 again. So really, right now, we're perfectly sustainable. We're down to pretty bare bones, but we can still ride it out. We're basically at a break even right now at 50 cents. So if we have another bull run, then we can expand quicker. But if we have more of a bear run, we'll have to maybe contract a little bit, and that's just the name of the game. But really, I'm here till the wheels fall off. So, I mean, it's always going to continue no matter what.
It sounds good. All right, so let's get back to my last question. I was talking about the Nexus wallet.
Mm-hmm.
There was this problem with staking, which now is fixed. It works okay. The second big issue is the blockchain forks, and it is still not completely fixed. So the questions are, do you think the forks will be solved for good? And if you look at these basic functions, what give you confidence about smooth work of all the higher Tritium functionality?
Yep. So the issue with the forks was actually what's called, at least termed to us, block mutation attacks. So they happen when somebody would broadcast two blocks, the miner that generated it, one with a different timestamp than the other one. So that's actually what caused a significant series of these events that happened over 2018. So the last version update that we did actually solved that. Now the most recent incident that we did have was the fact of just an ordering of the rules of the Genesis transaction. Some people's databases, since I did a key pruning of the expired keys, certain people that actually synchronized from scratch ended up having those. So that was a mistake that I made in that instance, which caused some people to not have a Genesis if an old key was revived. So when they tried to connect the inputs, they didn't have that Genesis key. Now there's a function in there that does find the Genesis in case that happens, for them to be held into a separate database. So I'm very confident that the forks and the issues that we have been fixed and resolved. And a lot of the community has seen how to resolve them, and we've been able to work together. Now, as far as the higher level Tritium functionality, one of the biggest mistakes I have made is believing that I could do it all myself. And that's one thing that I've been seeing a lot more, and that's why I'm grateful to be having so many new people coming into the development. It's called coder blindness, where sometimes when you're the only person doing some of the core development, you don't have other people that look at your code, and you can miss simple little things. So now on the backend team, we have me, and then Dino, and Krishna, and Jack McGowan now, and Scott Simon. So I believe that having the proper testing procedures in place and having a lot more robust testing is going to definitely help prevent these things from happening. Now, as far as worrying about massive failures happening in the future, a lot of what's been done on the ledger level is not going to be changed too much on Tritium. There's going to be a couple little fixes that are basically changing the block structure and the transaction structure, but a lot of the core functionality as far as the consensus code is not going to change. So as we're seeing it running smoothly now, especially with the 2.5.4 update out, I'm confident that it's definitely moving in the right direction, and that we can move stronger from these types of failures, because as Elon Musk said, if things aren't failing, you're not innovating enough. So we have gone out there to innovate, and there has been some problems, and definitely with the right eyes and the right code reviews, I see that those problems will be eliminated.